America holds the dream of liberty and justice for all. The dream is to protect the attainment and success of democracy for everyone. As President Eisenhower emphasized in his 1961 farewell address,
our basic purposes have been to keep the peace, to foster progress in human achievement, and to enhance liberty, dignity, and integrity among peoples and among nations.
However, he was also alarmed enough to a growing situation that he was compelled to warn the American people about it. In his farewell address, he famously warned of the dangers of the emerging military-industrial complex. He blamed it on the federal government's growing funding of the military, but also,
yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Science had been something to inspire towards during the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the preceding Romantic movement. But after 2 world wars, it had found itself a new essential role, America's greatest weapon against tyranny. And thanks to its association with the military afterwards, science had become something to be feared. The most concentrated intellectual effort in history worked on the Manhattan Project to produce nuclear weapons for the US. These were used to obliterate 2 Japanese cities of civilians in the summer of 1945 and help ensure the surrender of Japan, officially ending World War II. The euphoria of winning abated, and the idea came to bear on the public's consciousness that the US had used science to kill an estimated 110,000 Japanese civilians without any warning, with another 230,000 dying from radiation injuries over the next 5 years. Many realized that there was an ominous and growing dark side to the power that science could unleash. Oppenheimer, the poet-physicist, asked, "We have made a thing that by all standards of the world we grew up in is an evil thing. And by so doing, by our participation in making it possible to make these things, we've raised again the question of whether science is good for man, of whether it is good to learn about the world, to try to understand it, to try to control it, to help give to the world of men increased insight, increased power." Albert Einstein shared this concern and sent a telegram to hundreds of prominent Americans in 1946, asking for enough money to fund a national campaign, in quote, "to let the people know that a new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move toward higher levels." His telegram appeal contained what has become one of the most famous quotes in all of science. "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking, and we thus drift towards unparalleled catastrophe." Today, the idea that everything has changed, save our modes of thinking, might refer not only to the atomic bomb, but also to climate change, to biodiversity loss, and a host of other science-themed challenges we now face. Einstein's point was how the unleashed power of these advanced technologies can only be beneficial when we use higher thinking. Hindsight is 20/20, and this awareness of consequences tends to come after science has delivered the awesome power to governments and industry. Vannevar Bush, the very first presidential science advisor for the US, saw the growing influx of talent coming into the country and believed that science and technology would lead to military superiority for whichever country best exploited them. He scheduled a hasty meeting in June of 1940 with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who approved of a federal agency in less than 10 minutes that would coordinate research efforts. The National Defense Research Committee oversaw the development of the atomic bomb, radar, sonar, and other numerous inventions critical to the war effort. Accommodations for the military, with the support from what Eisenhower in 1961 would later regretfully refer to as the military-industrial complex, brought about immense changes throughout America. The fear driving this was that if America didn't recommit to science and technology, they might lose the Cold War and be overrun by an authoritarian society. Within a year of the Soviets' launch of Sputnik 1, the first Earth-orbiting satellite, the National Defense Education Act of 1958 was passed, with the goals to improve education and improving individual Americans' ability to pursue a higher education. Science became a major issue on the 1960 presidential campaign trail. The space and arms race continued with Russia, and the defense budget continued to grow. Over the course of a single generation, governments taking over as the principal funder of scientific research in peacetime allowed scientists to turn inward, away from the public and toward their lab benches, at the very time that the public had developed a love-hate relationship with science. Though scientists' work is by nature anti-authoritarian and artistic, they came to be seen as figures of authority in white lab coats, devoid of values, bland, and superior to others. This new image of science, implanted in baby boomers by hundreds of classroom film strips like in Duck and Cover, couldn't have been less inspiring or farther from the truth. Very little of the passions that scientists had would be communicated to the general public for the next 50 years. The public sees the science community dash out the results of successful experiments and then go and withdraw into its ivory tower and go silent. Science came to be regarded as a culture of monks, intellectual, quietly cloistered, sexually and creatively dry. What vastly aided this was that scientists only had to impress their own university departments and governmental agencies to keep research funds coming their way. They had no incentive to impress the public, which was growing increasingly mistrustful of science. Scientists forgot their inherent responsibility to the public, and indeed the taxpayers who deserved a say in what science did. Locked in a subculture of competitive, intelligent, and passionate people focused on their own research, scientists became notoriously cheap donors of both time and money, and withdrew from civic life in other ways. Attitudes of superiority developed within the science community, attitudes that ran counter to the fundamentally anti-authoritarian nature of scientific inquiry. Many scientists, for example, came to view politics as something dirty and beneath them. Arguing that they were objective, they held back on voicing their opinions on political issues. They stepped back, so as a result, democracy continued to draw its elected leaders primarily from the humanities, which lack significant training on science or how modern law and democracy relate to science. This has created a culture war that is with us to this day, threatening the ability of Western democracies to solve the problems. To return back to the military, defense spending continued to soar, and the manufacturers that concentrated on military production after World War II, they expanded and grew to meet that demand. The military-industrial complex would continue to alter everything from transportation to land development to race relations and energy use, so the sum of money spent maintaining roads. It created a wide variety of social, economic, psychological, and political challenges that are still with us today, all because science and the bomb. By one estimate, the US has been responsible for directly or indirectly killing nearly 20 million people since the end of the Second World War. In recent years, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan fueled enormous increases in defense spending and contracts not seen since the Cold War. And the lines are blurring with new military technologies like cyber warfare, surveillance, private mercenary armies, and AI. Soon, this war effort-funded research would be used by industries and would further drive this skepticism about government science. But before we talk about the industrial war on science, our next video will cover some of the psychological implications of this Cold War on the young baby boomers of the time, and how we might better understand the distrust in science we are left with today. Thank you for joining us.